Hi, welcome to It's All Relative with Dr. Eliza Filby. This week we're doing a deep dive on Gen Z, work, the job apocalypse. Have I said that right? And why work doesn't pay. I think Gen Z are sort of misinterpreted as lazy, entitled, and unwilling to work hard. And why won't they pick up the phone? Why are they more obsessed with Pilates than performance? The actual truth is work doesn't pay in the same way that it did for our parents. So when people say the career ladder is broken, what they mean is the training model for the career ladder is broken. People that work on a screen, your life in work has got so much harder. Work has become digitalized and dehumanized and is about to become. Now, I'm a founder of a business called All Relative, where we do a lot of workshops with businesses and keynotes for businesses around the future of work. And I've been asked to go in and talk about Gen Z. The sort of rationale behind that was this perception that Gen Z are uniquely different, this sort of foreign species that older generations can't really understand. They definitely can't manage them. There's all this kind of points of friction around etiquette, around, why won't they pick up the phone? Why are they more obsessed with Pilates than performance? And all of these sort of points of grievance thrown at this generation. Now, it's slightly changing because Gen Z are growing up and frankly, they're no longer young. Many of them are managers. I think there's also been a really important shift that's happened since the pandemic. So if we think about Gen Z, they're the generation for whom the pandemic and remote working or working in a pandemic situation was their first entry point into work. So if they see working from home as a right, not a privilege, like older generations do, that's why, because it was their normal. They also kind of experienced the Great Resignation. Now, the Great Resignation, I don't know if you remember this or want to remember this, but was a moment in the aftermath of the pandemic where there was this culture where people were just sort of quitting. Young employees sort of seemingly had the power and were maybe sometimes like quiet quitting or maybe having two jobs or were resigning from jobs that and this was to great sort of bemusement and confusion to the older employees, and couldn't understand Gen Z because they were not taking a career or a job as seriously as older generations did when they were young. And so there was a real interesting power dynamic about 2 or 3 years ago between the employee and the employer, where the employee definitely had the power. That has changed. That has changed because of two things. Number one, AI and the mass layoffs, but also the labour freeze at entry level, right? And where it's happening across the world, not just here in the UK, in the US, but across the world globally. Graduate in particular, unemployment is creeping up. The second reason, though, is because also, particularly in the UK, the cost of hiring people and the expectations of wages have changed because of the cost of living crisis, but also taxation from the government. So there's been actually disincentives to employing young people. So what's happened is there has been a swing in that power balance between employer and employee. Gen Z now, I would say, are less idealistic, more realistic, slightly more grateful, I think, to get a job in current labour market. But it's also within this underlying economic situation where, frankly, work doesn't pay in the same way that it did for our parents. And that's what I want to kind of go into, is the rewards of work and how they've changed. And that's why I think Gen Z are sort of misinterpreted as lazy, entitled, and unwilling to work hard. The actual truth is there is an underlying economic story that's underscoring all of this shifting attitudes towards work and work-life balance and loyalty to a workplace. It's all relative. It's the mug. We have branded goods here, and it's reflective of the fact that I have a weekly Substack called It's All Relative out every Friday, and as you can see, we also have a weekly YouTube show out every Wednesday. Please do go over to Substack, subscribe. You'll get everything for free, no paywall, and I'd love it if you could comment, like on any of the posts. Now, this is familiar terrain for me, and for anyone that knows my work. My book was called Inheritocracy. It's time to talk about the bank of mum and dad. And although it was about the rising phenomena of family wealth, particularly amongst the sort of affluent middle class, and the role that the bank of mum and dad is playing in supporting, enhancing people's life chances, but it was also about the decline of the meritocracy and that idea that if you work hard, you got educated, you became, you were on that professional sort of track, the rewards would come. And that's declined. And I think it's important to say, when we say decline of the meritocracy, there was a moment when we were seeing sort of lowering social inequality, rising meritocracy, particularly the rewards on education were really being felt. And that was felt by, I would say, the boomers and Gen X. But I think that story has been under strain for quite some time. And actually, millennials were the first generation to feel it, where the rewards on that education and particularly around wages, that was beginning to crack really in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Now, wages have stalled, right? And that's the important context here. But other things in life, the big ticket items in life have gone up for young people, and that's housing, childcare, education, those three things, and healthcare if you're in the US. And what's happened is that millennials started to realize this in the 2010s and go, hang on a minute, how is it that I'm having to depend on my parents to get on the housing ladder? And how is it that my student debt is now really becoming an increasing percentage of my pay packet? But it's become really critical and defining for Gen Z. And so whilst Gen Z will recognise the phenomenon of the bank of mum and dad, I think they're also questioning sort of millennials' loyalty to work and that sort of meritocratic narrative of work hard, forge a career, and the financial stability will come. And I think that's partly because wages have stalled and they've gone up a bit since the pandemic, but so's the cost of everything else, right? But it's not just an economic story. It's also, I think, a work story. So let me explain what I mean by this. So we have, let me put my cup down, I'm getting serious. We have a sort of like an understanding that technology has transformed the workplace. I actually don't think it has. You look at the technology that we use in work, it actually hasn't been updated that much, right? It's being updated now. But actually, people were using Microsoft Word 20 years ago and actually it hasn't really changed or updated, right? Same with Excel, that much. What has changed is the relentless sort of digitalization of work and the inability to switch off. So if you look at the data on work-related stress and anxiety, it's very clear where that starts to really intensify for professionals. Okay, and I'm talking about professionals here, and I will talk about work more broadly, but I think it's important to recognize that people that work on a screen, your life in work has got so much harder, partly because of the resources and aids and support has been withdrawn gradually. Okay, it used to be that all professionals had all their documents typed up by an army of typists in the basement, always women. Now they have to type up their own administration, right? A lot of people used to have PAs and a sort of a whole network of infrastructure. Now people do their own administration, their own diaries, their own bookings. But it's also, if you look at the data, the time at which professionals started to complain about work-related stress was around 2012. And that just continues to increase throughout the 2010s. Now, there's a very clear reason for this, is because that is the moment where the smartphone started to properly be integrated into work. And so whilst the BlackBerry was important and enabled you to take your work home with you, the smartphone enabled you to take your work really home with you and yourself into work. And so you got this complete blurring of the distinction between work and self, life admin, work admin, right? So definitely this sort of to-do list that never stops. And also the never switch off phenomena. Now, if you're in your 40s and 50s, you will remember a work time where if you wanted to check your work emails, you had to go into the office. And you have seen that gradually eroded. If you're in your 20s, you probably cannot understand that that was ever a thing. But also, you grew up with a smartphone in your pocket from a very young age. So this notification culture, this overwhelm from a digital device started to impact you, not in your 30s, but in your teens. And you, I think, Gen Z, are far better aware of the overwhelm and the stress and the anxiety that comes from always being on compared to someone in their 30s and 40s, and certainly their 50s and 60s. And so work has become digitalized and dehumanized, and is about to become even more dehumanized with agentic AI. And so if Gen Z are sort of wanting better boundaries, want a clearer distinction between work life and home life, it's because they've grown up with, even more than older generations, no boundaries when it comes to tech and real life, and are recognizing the need for that in the workplace. I hope I've explained that properly. But I think what I'm saying is it's not just an economic argument. The conversation around work-life balance is a consequence of the dehumanization, the digitalization of the workplace. And by the way, online meetings have made this even worse, right? Because hybridity and hybrid working and the ability to work from home, we think gives us more flexibility. Potentially it gives us more overwhelm, and definitely now requires more meetings. And so the number of meetings has increased by 150% since the pandemic. And I think that's because obviously we're seeing each other less and we're having those, water cooler moments and those touch-in moments less. But it's also because our diaries now look like they did in school. Like bum, 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 bum. There's no space to think, to chat, for release, to breathe often during the working day. And I think that if Gen Z are kind of questioning that, it's to the aid of those in senior leadership. I think, and I just want to kind of also reflect on where Gen Z is at with AI in the workplace. Now, a lot of companies have gone shopping and have spent the last 3 or 4 years going shopping and buying up AI products and various, resources. And now we're in the sort of, if we've done the shopping phase, we're in the integration phase. And you're already seeing some really interesting data that's suggesting that AI is not the productivity hack that people think it is. And it's actually made burnout more likely in the workplace and disengagement more likely, and seeing, as a result, declining culture. We hear a lot of the time of, it won't be AI that takes your job. It'll be someone with AI that takes your job. I think that's really now probably someone with AI and using AI surreptitiously that will take your job. Because one of the things that you're seeing is the rise of people voice activating ChatGPT on their phone, asking it questions that they probably once would have asked their line manager, but wanting to use AI on their phone rather than the formal AI on their workstation or on their laptop. Why? Because no one wants a monitored AI system to be feeding data to their company that proves they don't know stuff, or no one wants to reveal to their boss what they don't know, right? Or what they're potentially embarrassed that they don't know. And so you're seeing the surreptitious use of AI, and also I think a deflection to AI when actually people should be connecting with other humans in the workplace, but they're either not surrounded by them because of hybrid working or working from home, or people don't have time. And so you're seeing this horrible erosion of the career ladder, not because AI is taking jobs, but because the learning isn't actually being allowed to happen. And, you know, I learnt most of the stuff in work, you know, I think by just watching people. And I know a lot of my generation who feel the same, that we spent basically 10 years sitting around watching our seniors do the thing that we now do. And that's not happening to the same degree. So when people say the career ladder is broken, actually what they mean is the training model for the career ladder is broken. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which Gen Z are brilliantly forcing a questioning of sort of current trends in work. And it's not AI that's necessarily doing that, it's Gen Z. The fact that work doesn't pay, the fact that work is no longer a learning environment, and the fact that technology has dehumanized the workplace. Okay, let's look at your questions. Okay, this is a really good point. So it's also worth noting that earn more logic assumes stable career ladders still exist. AI is beginning to challenge that assumption. Yeah, I think by the way, I still think there's quite a lot of professions where there's still quite a stable career ladder. So I think we are in danger of like overemphasizing a broken ladder. But I do think that two things are likely. I think, first of all, one's already happening, is wealth beyond a wage, is that Gen Z are, and millennials are doing this too, but Gen Z are thinking, where can I gather extra revenue? Is it investments? Is it selling stuff? Is it separate business? Is it, you know, side hustle, whatever? And so building financial resilience through multiple streams of revenue, not just one wage. I think the second thing is learning and upskilling. So one of the things that definitely I've done, so, I mean, I did Ali Abdal's YouTube course, YouTube Academy, shout out to Ali Abdal, a couple of years ago. And I quite like being a student. I quite like finding out how ignorant I am about things. And it was really wonderful to go back, literally back to school. And thankfully he's a brilliant teacher. But I think it's going to be like a core part of millennials and Gen Z's life. And it's not necessarily going to be about, you know, formal courses at university anymore. You know, it could be something like Ali Abdal's YouTube Academy. But, you know, constantly upskilling and constantly learning is going to be actually, in the age of AI, a thing that we're all going to have to keep doing. And shape-shifting and being agile and flexible in what a job looks like and what a career looks like and what skills we need to acquire or sustain or disregard even. The question is who pays for that, because your employer probably won't, and the state definitely won't. So I suspect the onus will fall on the individual. I hired a Gen Zer and she was the most lazy, entitled person I've ever met. The level of self-involvement astounded me. I mean, is that a generation though? Or is that just a personality problem? The thing, when I talk to businesses, and particularly people in their 50s and 60s, the thing they say is, why don't young people have the hunger I did? Well, I think they're probably not prepared to put up with potentially what people did 20, 30 years ago. And not all of that was good, by the way. But I think there's a number of reasons why they don't just put up, shut up and work their way up like previous generations. I think the decline of deference in society, in households, in schools and on social media means that young people actually find it really difficult to naturally fit into a hierarchical, deferential institution. Okay, not all. If you have grown up in a highly deferential, quite often religious household, that's actually quite easy. The second reason is because we are all just more individualistic, okay? And that's not just young people. That's not just people in their 20s. That's also people in their 40s. And workplaces, particularly post-COVID and the hybrid era, have become more transactional. And it's more I than we. And then the third reason is that, and this is, don't hate me for this, but I think those that tend to have the parental safety net do not have the same hunger as those that do not. And that's just a fact. And I think if you are, there's nothing more motivating than having to see work as a fulfillment of your family responsibility. And there's a lot of people who are going to work to support their parents rather than be supported by their parents. But let's just remember over 50% of first-time buyers in London are more likely to get on the housing ladder by being loyal to their parents than by being loyal to their boss. And so where's the greater motivation? But it's a really important point as to why you're not seeing the same kind of hunger and maybe even the same resilience in younger people today than you did 30 years ago. If AI is going to take all the jobs, shouldn't young people just learn a trade instead? This has become like a real, I think, modern trope. It's like, become a plumber and then you'll survive in the age of AI. If there's too many plumbers, wages for plumbers will go down. So, it's all about supply and demand. I think the broader conversation that we need to be having is not what specific trades are safe, AI proof, is how can you realise your skills, your attributes, and the right market so that you can really learn to sell what you're good at. And I think, unfortunately, the idea of a job for life and a career for life is over. And I think we've got to help instill this sense of agility and resilience and flexibility within the individual, because we're just going to have to do that in order to survive the age of AI. I don't think fixating on certain professions or trades is really the answer here. I think we need to help people realise what they're good at and how they can market that. And that sounds crude, and I don't expect everyone to be a salesman or even a marketeer, but I think the sense of agility is the really important bit in all of this, is the flexibility that we all need to have to shapeshift and remain valuable. I mean, that's just horrific, but valuable in the marketplace, I think is really important. I just want to end with one thing, because I think what's really happened is that in the 2010s, and if you're interested in kind of the rise of DEI and woke culture and how it fused with work, go and listen to and watch our interview that we did with Ash Sarkar, who was heavily involved in the sort of evolution of left-wing activism in the 2010s, but she's got some really interesting and thoughtful ideas on that. And actually in sort of where she went wrong. But I do think we're entering I've talked about this a lot in different contexts and in different essays I've written, is this age of realism as a sort of, that we're entering into in the mid-2020s, realising that, number one, the economic conditions are even worse than we thought they were, and then we're in a series of permacrises. Number two is rising geopolitical tension. And number three is rising technological advances, all of which create a level of uncertainty that is forcing a degree of realism amongst young people who are now very grateful to have a job if they have one, and are thinking very, very resourcefully and in terms of their money, but also and investments, but also really thinking intergenerationally. In terms of building that financial resilience to cope in this age of uncertainty. And that's a level of realism that wasn't there 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And when I speak to employers and when I speak to people in their 20s now, there's a very different conversation happening around work than there was 3 or 4 years ago. And actually, I think it's probably healthier. And it's more reflective of where we're at. On that note, on that sobering note, I want to thank you for watching, and please do click and subscribe. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if that's where you're at and where you're listening or watching. And if you're on Spotify, please do follow us, subscribe. That's how you'll get more of the content from me. Thanks for watching.